The gas station sat at the edge of the city like a forgotten outpost, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, concrete stained by years of spilled fuel and tire marks. It was just after midnight. The air was quiet enough that every sound carried: the click of a pump handle, the distant hum of traffic, the soft hiss of fuel filling a tank. That he stood alone beside his car. A black man in his late 40s, dressed plainly. No flashy jewelry. No raised voice. Just a calm, deliberate presence as he watched the numbers roll on the pump. His jacket was folded neatly on the hood, his phone resting beside it. Screen dark. Two police cruisers rolled in almost silently. They didn't announce themselves at first. They didn't turn on the sirens. They parked at an angle that blocked the exit, headlights washing over the man and his car in a harsh white glare. The doors opened almost in sync. The officers moved with the confidence of men who expected obedience. One of them spoke first, his voice cutting through the quiet: "Step away from the vehicle." The man turned slowly, hands visible, confusion flickering across his face for just a moment. "Is there a problem, officer?" The second officer laughed under his breath, already circling the car, eyes scanning for something, anything, that justified what they had decided before they arrived. "License and registration," the first officer said. "Now." The man complied without protest. He reached carefully, retrieved his wallet, handed over his documents. His movements were measured, controlled. He had learned long ago that sudden gestures were dangerous in moments like this. The officers barely glanced at the paperwork. "Whose car is this?" one asked. "Mine," the man replied. "Registered in my name." The first officer's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that?" The words hung in the air, heavier than the night itself. The man took a breath. "It is my vehicle." "You're welcome to run." "Turn around," the officer snapped. Hands on the car. There was no explanation. No probable cause offered. Just authority asserted. The man hesitated, not in defiance, but in disbelief. That hesitation lasted less than a second. It was enough. The officer stepped closer, voice louder now, sharper. "I said turn around." The man obeyed, cold metal pressed against his wrists. The click of handcuffs echoed under the gas station canopy, louder than it should have been. A customer at the far pump froze, phone half raised, unsure whether to keep watching or look away. "What am I being detained for?" the man asked calmly. "For now," the second officer said. "For resisting." "I'm not resisting," the man replied, voice steady even as his arms were pulled behind him. "I'm complying." The first officer leaned in close enough that only the man could hear him. "You ask too many questions." They searched him aggressively. Emptied his pockets onto the hood of his car. Wallet. Keys. Phone. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. It didn't matter. One officer ran the plates. The other spoke into his radio, tone casual, already framing the narrative: possible stolen vehicle. Subject uncooperative. The man closed his eyes briefly. He knew how this went. He was placed in the back of the cruiser, the door slamming shut with finality. From inside, he watched as one officer leaned against his car, laughing, while the other spoke animatedly to a growing cluster of onlookers. Phones were out now. Recording. Streaming. Capturing the moment from shaky angles. "Sir, what did he do?" someone asked. The answer came without hesitation: he matched the description. No description was given. None was needed. As the cruiser pulled away, the gas station lights faded behind him, replaced by the dull reflection of streetlights streaking across the window. His hands were numb from the cuffs. His jaw was tight, not from fear, but from restraint. At the station, the process continued. Mugshot. Fingerprints. A holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and old sweat. The charge sheet was thin, vague, padded with language that sounded official enough to pass initial review: obstruction, failure to comply, suspected vehicle theft pending investigation, pending. Hours later, after verification proved what he had said from the beginning, the charges were quietly adjusted. Then reduced. Then delayed that he was released just before dawn. No apology. No explanation, just a piece of paper and a reminder to appear in court. As he stepped outside into the pale morning light, he looked back once at the building. Officers moved inside like nothing unusual had happened. Like his night had been nothing more than paperwork. He adjusted his jacket, retrieved his phone, and walked to his car. What the officers didn't know, what they couldn't have known standing under those gas station lights, was that the courtroom listed on that citation was one he knew very well, not as a defendant, but as a place where he had spent years upholding the law, and where, the very next day, he would sit elevated behind the bench, calm and composed, presiding over a hearing with their names printed neatly at the top of the docket. By morning, the city had moved on, traffic filled the streets again. Coffee shops opened. Radios murmured headlines that had nothing to do with what happened under those gas station lights. For most people, the night was already forgotten. For the officers, it barely registered. They finished their shifts, logged their reports, and went home convinced the paperwork would protect them the way it always had. The narrative was already written in language that blurred intent and softened action. Subject appeared evasive. Non-compliant behavior observed. Officer safety concerns. Routine phrases. Familiar shields. One officer slept late, his phone buzzing intermittently with notifications he ignored. The other stopped by the precinct gym, joking with colleagues, replaying the arrest with exaggerated confidence. Guy was acting shady, he said. You know how it is. No one questioned him, but somewhere else in the city, the story was changing shape. By mid-morning, the videos had spread beyond the gas station. First to neighborhood group chats. Then to social media feeds where context mattered less than clarity. The footage was grainy, but the sound was unmistakable. Calm questions. Abrupt commands. The click of cuffs. A voice saying, "I'm complying," followed by laughter. Comments multiplied quickly. Why were they even there? He didn't do anything. Same thing, every time. By noon, a local civil rights attorney had shared the clip with a single sentence attached. This needs review. At the courthouse, the man from the gas station arrived early. He didn't rush. He never did. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, as he passed through security with a nod to deputies who recognized him instantly. Respect was exchanged quietly, without ceremony. He changed in his chambers, placing his jacket carefully over the chair, smoothing the cuffs of his robe. The mirror reflected a face that showed no trace of the night before, no anger, no fatigue. Only focus. On his desk sat the morning docket. He scanned it once, efficiently, until his eyes paused on two familiar names, the same officers, charged not criminally, yet, but summoned for a preliminary departmental hearing tied to a citizen complaint that had escalated faster than expected. The timing was unusual. The assignment more so. He read the case file without expression. Across town, the officers were receiving calls. Have you seen this? Internal Affairs wants statements. There's a hearing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, the first officer felt a flicker of irritation. It's nothing, he said. Videos don't show the full picture. The second was quieter. He watched the footage again, this time without sound. He noticed things he hadn't before: the man's still hands, the absence of threat, the way commands overlapped compliance. His jaw tightened. At the station, supervisors were suddenly attentive. Questions were asked. Not accusations, yet, but clarifications. Why no initial call was logged? Why body cameras were partially obscured? Why the language in the report didn't align cleanly with the footage now circulating online? By evening, local news had picked it up, not as a headline. Not yet. Just a short segment at the end of a broadcast. Questions raised after gas station arrest. Faces blurred. Names withheld. The phrase, "ongoing review," repeated twice. The officers watched it from separate locations. One scoffed. Media circus. The other turned the TV off. Night came again, but this time, sleep didn't. Morning arrived too quickly. The courthouse hallway was quiet as the officers entered, uniforms crisp, expressions guarded. They spoke in low tones, rehearsing explanations, leaning on procedure. They expected a junior magistrate. Someone tired. Someone predictable. They didn't look up immediately when the courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called the room to order. Only then did they see him that he entered without drama, taking his place behind the bench with practiced ease. He adjusted the microphone. Opened the file. Looked up. Recognition struck like a physical blow. The gas station lights were gone, but the memory was instant and undeniable. Same man. Same calm eyes. Same measured presence, only now, the elevation was reversed. Neither officer spoke. The room settled into a heavy stillness, every shuffle of paper amplified. Phones were already out in the gallery. Not recording openly, but ready. The man on the bench surveyed the room, expression neutral, voice steady when he finally spoke. Let's proceed. No emphasis. No accusation, just process, and for the first time since the night before, the officers felt something unfamiliar tighten in their chests, uncertainty. The courtroom did not rush to fill the silence that it held it. The judge's gaze moved slowly from the case file to the officers standing before him. He did not stare them down. He did not harden his expression. His calm was more unsettling than anger could have been. Officer Daniels, he said evenly, consulting the file. Officer Reynolds. Both men straightened instinctively. You are here today in response to a citizen complaint and a departmental review request stemming from an arrest made at a gas station just after midnight. He paused. Correct? Yes, Your Honor, Daniels replied quickly. The judge nodded once. Before we proceed, I want to clarify something for the record. This is not a criminal trial. This is a hearing to determine whether your conduct met departmental policy and constitutional standards. He let that settle. Do you understand the purpose of this hearing? Yes, Your Honor, both officers said, nearly in unison. The judge placed his hands together on the bench. Good. He did not mention the gas station yet. He did not mention handcuffs or laughter or the phrase he matched the description. Instead, he began where authority always protected itself. Policy. Officer Daniels, he said, please explain why you and your partner entered the gas station without an active call. Daniels cleared his throat. We were conducting a routine patrol, Your Honor. The area has had recent incidents of vehicle theft. The judge nodded slightly. How many thefts in the last 30 days? Daniels hesitated. I don't have the exact number. The judge turned a page. I do. He read calmly. 0 reported vehicle thefts within a 1-mile radius in that time frame. A ripple moved through the gallery. The judge continued. So I'll ask again. Why did you initiate contact with the individual at the pump? Daniels shifted his weight. He appeared suspicious. In what way? The judge asked. He was alone. Late hour. Nervous. The judge looked up. Define nervous. Daniels opened his mouth. Closed it. He kept looking around. The judge nodded again, writing something down. Officer Reynolds, he said, turning slightly. Do you agree with that assessment? Reynolds hesitated longer. He didn't run, he said carefully. He didn't reach for anything. The room grew quieter. The judge glanced back at the file. According to your report, Officer Daniels, the subject was uncooperative. Can you explain what action constituted noncompliance? Daniels' voice tightened. He questioned our authority. The judge looked at him directly now. Questioning authority is not illegal. Daniels swallowed. He hesitated. How long? The judge asked. Less than a second, Reynolds said before he could stop himself. Every head in the room turned slightly. The judge did not react outwardly. Less than a second, he repeated softly. And during that second, did the subject make any threatening movement? No, Your Honor, Reynolds said. The judge turned another page. Yet he was handcuffed within moments. Yes, Daniels said. For officer safety. The judge leaned back slightly. Let's talk about officer safety. He tapped the file once. 2 armed officers. 1 unarmed civilian. Open, well-lit location. No visible weapon. Compliance with commands. He looked up. Explain the immediate threat. Daniel's jaw tightened. We don't wait for threats to become real. The judge held his gaze. Neither does the Constitution permit punishment without cause. A murmur spread through the room. The judge raised a hand, silencing it. Officer Reynolds, he said, you ran the plates. Yes, Your Honor. What was the result? They came back registered to the subject. And yet, the judge continued, you radioed in possible stolen vehicle. Why? Reynolds' voice was lower now. Procedure. The judge tilted his head slightly. Procedure requires confirmation before escalation. Reynolds nodded. Yes, Your Honor. So the statement was inaccurate. Yes. The judge wrote again, slowly, deliberately. Each stroke of the pen seemed louder than it should have been. Let's address the charge of resisting, the judge said. Describe the resistance. Daniels exhaled sharply. He questioned why he was being detained. The judge's eyes lifted. That is a question. Not resistance. Daniels said nothing. The judge turned to the screen mounted beside the bench. We will now review publicly available footage. The video played without commentary. The courtroom watched as the scene unfolded exactly as it had online. The calm voice. The abrupt command. The cuffs. The words, I'm complying. The judge let the video run to the end. When it stopped, he did not look at the officers right away. Instead, he addressed the room. This hearing is not about intent, he said. It is about action. He finally turned back to them. Do either of you dispute the accuracy of this footage? No, Your Honor, Daniels said quietly. The judge nodded. Then the record will reflect that. He closed the file partway. There is one more matter. Both officers looked up at the station. The judge said, the subject was held for several hours despite verification of ownership and identity. Yes, Daniels said. Processing takes time. The judge's voice remained even. Processing should not become punishment. He closed the file completely now. The sound echoed. For the purposes of this hearing, he said, I find sufficient evidence to conclude that departmental policy regarding reasonable suspicion, escalation, and arrest protocol was violated. The words landed without force, but with weight. The officers stood frozen. The judge did not raise his voice. He did not moralize. He simply continued, this matter will be referred for further review and interim action. He looked at them one last time. Court will recess. The gavel came down, and for the first time since they had stepped under those gas station lights, the officers understood something with absolute clarity. The rules they relied on had turned. The courtroom did not empty immediately. No one rushed to speak. No one moved to reclaim the space with chatter. The air felt altered, as if something invisible had shifted direction. The judge remained seated for a moment after the gavel fell. Not out of hesitation, but intention. He reviewed the file once more, slower now, ensuring the record was clean, precise, undeniable. Then he stood, removed his glasses, and exited through the side door without a backward glance. Only then did the room exhale. Officer Daniels felt it first, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with authority or protocol. The certainty he had carried into the building was gone, replaced by a sharp, unfamiliar awareness. Every word he had spoken was now fixed in an official record, weighed against evidence he could not outrun. Reynolds avoided his partner's eyes. Outside the courtroom, phones were already lighting up. The hearing hadn't been streamed, but enough people had witnessed the exchange. Enough had recognized the man behind the bench. Whispers traveled fast in a building designed for silence. That was him. The gas station guy. He's the judge. By midday, the story had evolved. Local media updated their segments, no longer vague. Still cautious, but clearer. New developments in gas station arrest case. Screens showed courthouse steps. Legal analysts spoke carefully about conflict of interest, then corrected themselves when documents confirmed the assignment had been automatic, random, procedurally sound. No exception. No favoritism, just the system, functioning as written. Internal Affairs acted quickly, not dramatically, but decisively. Both officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Their badges were collected without ceremony. Their weapons logged. Standard procedure. This time, procedure didn't feel protective. Daniel sat alone in his car in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. He replayed the night in fragments, the lights, the cuffs, the laugh he hadn't thought mattered. For the first time, he heard it the way others might have. Reynolds went home and said nothing. He watched the video again, then again, noticing how small the justification sounded when stripped of context and confidence. At the courthouse, the judge returned to his chambers. He closed the door and finally allowed himself a breath. On his desk, his phone buzzed with messages he didn't open. He wasn't interested in commentary. He had done nothing extraordinary. He had followed the law. The same law that had followed him into a holding cell hours earlier. That symmetry mattered. By evening, the department released a statement. Carefully worded. No admissions. But no denials either. Policy review underway. Commitment to public trust. The phrases were familiar, but the timing was not. Civil rights groups amplified the footage with context now attached. Not outrage, analysis. Side-by-side comparisons of policy manuals and the officers' actions. Calm breakdowns. Clear contradictions. The story no longer belonged to anger. It belonged to accountability. The officers' names trended briefly, then settled into something quieter but more dangerous: institutional scrutiny. Supervisors reviewed past reports. Patterns were flagged. Similar language surfaced. Similar arrests. Similar outcomes, nothing isolated, everything connected. Late that night, the judge sat at home, lights low, robe folded neatly over a chair. He did not feel victorious. He felt resolved. The system had not favored him, it had finally seen him. Tomorrow, the process would continue without him, and that was the point. The consequences did not arrive all at once, they unfolded the way institutions prefer them to, quietly, methodically, wrapped in procedure rather than spectacle. By the end of the week, Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds were no longer on paid leave. Their status shifted to unpaid suspension pending outcome. The change came without announcement, delivered through internal channels that offered no room for negotiation. Their access cards stopped working. Their names disappeared from active duty rosters. No one celebrated it, but no one intervened either. Internal Affairs interviews followed, long and exhaustive. Not confrontational, not emotional. Just relentless. Each answer was measured against video. Each justification against policy. Each report against prior conduct. Daniels tried to hold the line. He spoke confidently at first, leaning on experience, on years of service. He framed the arrest as instinct. Training. Pattern recognition. He used phrases he had used before, phrases that had never failed him. This time, they were read back to him slowly, line by line. How do you define the evasive, Officer Daniels? What objective behavior supports this claim? Why does this phrasing appear in 4 separate reports involving different individuals? The questions were not accusatory, they were cumulative. Reynolds' interview unfolded differently. He did not defend the indefensible. He acknowledged gaps. He admitted uncertainty. He described the moment hesitation turned into escalation, not as threat, but momentum. A situation that had slipped out of control because no one chose to slow it down. That admission was documented. Outside the department, the civil case moved forward. The man from the gas station, now referred to only as the plaintiff in filings, did not hold a press conference. He did not give interviews. His legal team filed quietly, thoroughly, citing constitutional violations, unlawful detention, and emotional distress. The language was precise. Unemotional, damages were listed. So were reforms. The city responded with urgency born of exposure. Settlement discussions began early, not because liability was certain, but because denial was no longer plausible. The video was clear. The hearing transcript was public. The judge's findings, though limited in scope, carried weight. Negotiations stretched over weeks. During that time, Daniel's world narrowed. Friends from the force stopped calling. Not out of hostility, but caution. Association now carried risk. Conversations felt monitored even when they weren't. He attended mandatory counseling sessions where no one raised their voice and no one offered reassurance. At night, he lay awake replaying moments he had once dismissed as routine, the laugh, the assumption, the certainty that he could act first and explain later. Reynolds spent those same nights differently. He watched his career dissolve with a strange clarity. He did not blame the judge. He did not blame the video. He blamed the silence he had maintained for years, the moments he had let things slide because that was easier than challenging a partner. That realization settled heavily. When the internal affairs findings were finalized, they were not dramatic, they were devastating. Officer Daniels was found to have violated multiple departmental policies: lack of reasonable suspicion, improper escalation, false reporting language, and failure to de-escalate. His termination was recommended unanimously. Officer Reynolds' findings were mixed. Policy violations were confirmed, but mitigating factors were noted: cooperation, candor, absence of prior complaints. He was demoted, placed on extended probation, and removed permanently from patrol duty. The announcements were internal first, then they became public. Local media reported it plainly. No sensational headlines. Just facts. Officer terminated following gas station arrest. Department confirms policy failures. The story no longer relied on outrage to sustain attention. It relied on outcome. The civil case settled soon after. The city agreed to a significant payout. Not framed as guilt, but as resolution. Funds were allocated not only to the plaintiff, but to mandatory training initiatives tied directly to the violations cited in the hearing. Every dollar was accounted for. At the settlement signing, the man from the gas station sat quietly at the end of the table. He did not smile. He did not speak unless spoken to. When asked if he wished to make a statement, he declined. His silence carried more weight than any speech could have. Daniels was officially terminated the following Monday. He turned in his uniform piece by piece. Badge last. He hesitated before placing it on the counter, as if expecting someone to stop him. No one did. Reynolds remained employed, but altered. His patrol car was reassigned. His role reduced to administrative oversight. Reports instead of arrests. Observation instead of action. He accepted it without protest. He understood now what authority was supposed to feel like. At the courthouse, the judge continued his work uninterrupted. He recused himself from all matters related to the case going forward, as required. Other judges handled the remaining proceedings. No special treatment. No lingering presence, yet his influence was unmistakable. The hearing transcript was circulated in judicial training programs. Not because of who presided, but because of how the law had been applied. Calmly. Precisely. Without personal commentary, the system had corrected itself in public view, and that visibility mattered. Community meetings followed, not rallies. Not protests. Structured forums where policy changes were explained and questioned. The department's leadership stood at podiums and answered carefully. Sometimes awkwardly. Sometimes inadequately, but they showed up. For the first time in years, attendance grew instead of shrank. The man from the gas station attended one of those meetings anonymously, sitting in the back. No one recognized him without the robe. No one approached him. He listened. The consequences continued, not as punishment, but as recalibration. A reminder that power, when left unchecked, calcifies, and when examined under its own rules, it can still be reshaped. Change did not announce itself with banners or speeches. It moved through memos, revisions, and quiet directives issued from offices where language mattered more than volume. Within a month of the settlement, the department released an updated policy manual. The changes were not cosmetic. Sections on reasonable suspicion were expanded, no longer reduced to vague interpretations. Escalation protocols were rewritten with explicit thresholds. Hesitation, the manual now stated, was not defiance. Questioning was not resistance. Compliance did not require silence, body camera requirements tightened. Automatic activation zones were established around traffic stops and public encounters. Failure to comply no longer triggered discretionary review, it triggered immediate administrative action. Training schedules shifted, not one-off seminars, but mandatory quarterly sessions led jointly by legal scholars, civil rights attorneys, and senior officers with no disciplinary history. Real footage was used. Real transcripts. Including the hearing that had begun it all, names were removed, conduct was not. Recruits were taught the gas station scenario as a case study. Not framed as a scandal, but as a systems failure, how assumptions compound, how momentum replaces judgment, how authority can drift when unchallenged. Veteran officers attended reluctantly at first, then attentively. Supervisors were retrained as well. Their evaluations were updated to include de-escalation metrics, complaint resolution patterns, and intervention records. Silence in the face of misconduct was formally reclassified, not neutral, but contributory. That change unsettled more people than the termination ever had. Oversight extended beyond the department. The City Council authorized an independent civilian review board with subpoena power. Not symbolic. Functional. Its members were drawn from legal, academic, and community backgrounds, bound by strict evidentiary standards. Complaints were no longer filtered entirely through internal channels, transparency became procedural, quarterly reports were published online. Arrest demographics. Use of force statistics. Complaint outcomes. Redacted where required, but complete enough to invite scrutiny. Some officers bristled, others adjusted. Policing did not stop. But it slowed in places where it needed to. Conversations replaced commands more often than before. Backup was called sooner. Stops ended without handcuffs more frequently, small shifts, noticeable ones. At the courthouse, the judge watched none of this directly. He read summaries. Reviewed compliance filings when they crossed his docket. Approved consent decrees when required. His role remained limited, by design. That restraint mattered. The reform did not orbit him. It stood on its own. Community trust did not return overnight. It rarely does. But attendance at oversight meetings stabilized. Complaints decreased in the precincts affected by the new protocols. Lawsuits dropped the following quarter, not to zero, but enough to register. The department's leadership acknowledged the changes publicly. Not as triumph, but necessity. Statements avoided defensiveness. The language was careful. Measured. Accountability had been absorbed into structure, not dependent on outrage, not reliant on a single case. The gas station arrest became a reference point rather than a wound. Cited in training. Mentioned in policy footnotes. Embedded into institutional memory. A reminder that reform does not begin with punishment. It begins when rules are finally enforced as written. The gas station still stood at the edge of the city, same lights. Same concrete. Same quiet hours after midnight. Most people who stopped there had no idea what had happened months earlier. And that was how it should be. Justice, when done correctly, does not leave monuments. It leaves systems that work better than before. The man who had stood there in handcuffs returned once, briefly. Not to make a point. Not to revisit the moment. Just to refuel, like anyone else. He paid, nodded to the clerk, and drove away without incident. No one recognized him. At the courthouse, he continued to take the bench each morning, robe pressed, voice steady, rulings grounded in the same principles that had guided him that night. He did not reference the case. He did not need to. The law had already spoken through action. For the officers who passed through that courtroom in the future, something had changed. Not fear, but awareness. A recognition that authority did not end at the badge, and that the rules they enforced could just as easily enforce themselves. The city did not become perfect, but it became quieter in the right ways, fewer unnecessary stops. Fewer escalations that began with assumption. More pauses. More questions asked before force, not after. Justice did not arrive as revenge.it arrived as correction, and that is the kind that lasts, because accountability is not about humiliation. It is about alignment, bringing power back under the law that grants it meaning. If this story resonated with you, it is because it is not rare. It is because it is possible. Watch closely. Ask questions. Support transparency where you live. Not every injustice ends this way, but every reform begins when someone insists that the rules apply to everyone.